Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but yes, your connection now is okay. Thank you for testing. Okay, now it's time to finish the testing. And I wish a good meeting for everyone.
Let us start. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to call the meeting to order. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to the fourth day of the informal virtual session of the 24th meeting of the subsidiary body on scientific, technical, and technological advice. The informal session began last Wednesday, 17 February, and continued to Friday, 19 February. We did not meet on Monday and Tuesday of this week in order to avoid conflict with the fifth session of the United Nations Environment Assembly. This session will continue tomorrow and Friday, the 25th and 26th of February. I would like to bring your attention that based on the initial plan for the organization of work as stated in the scenario notes for this meeting, we cover agenda item 3 on post-2020 global biodiversity framework and agenda item 4 on synthetic biology. Also, we're supposed to complete agenda item 5 on risk assessment last week. Since today, we still have to complete item 5. This means that we are 1 to 1.5 hours behind schedule. Another 4 agenda items pending to be covered this week. Then, we still to do our best to find the time to return to agenda item 3 and allow some more observers to make their statements. To achieve this goal, I would like to urge you to cooperate and stay strictly with the time allocated for each intervention. Dear colleagues, when we adjourned on Friday, we were hearing the statements on item 5 of the provisional agenda, risk assessment and risk management of living modified organisms, chaired by my colleague of the Substat Bureau, Mr. Gaute Boyd Hansen from Norway. Now I hand over the chairing back over to him. So have a good day to everybody. And Gaute, you have the floor. Gaute, are you around? So it seems there are a few. While he connects properly, meanwhile, I'll give the floor to Secretariat for some technical reminders. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sekio, and good time of the day, dear colleagues. I would like to welcome you to the fourth day of our informal session, and just would like to remind you of some technical matters. First of all, regarding the use of our online system. I think that most of you are already well familiar with it, but still just in case. When the chair opens the floor for interventions, if you wish to speak and the chair has not already indicated that you are in the queue, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. It will turn yellow. your request will be entered in the queue visible to the chair. When the chairs give you the floor, the moderator will activate your microphone. The status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. We would also like to remind participants that the chat box is for brief communication and therefore to keep your remarks here short. For optimal viewing, we recommend that you choose the star mode from the menu that is visible on the bottom left of your screen when you hover your cursor there. Please note that simultaneous interpretation is available for this session. Please choose your desired language from the menu visible at the top of your screen. The time for statements, as Chair mentioned, is limited to 3 minutes for parties, 5 minutes for regional groups and major groups. A clock is provided for you on the screen to help you to manage your time. But please do not speed up your reading, as it will be challenging for interpreters to follow you. Now, regarding the written versions of the statements, the CBD Secretariat has developed an online application that allows countries and organizations to upload their statements to the meeting page. It's highly recommended that participants use this tool instead of emailing their statements, as it helps streamline the meeting process and facilitates the work of the interpreters. Uploading instructions were included in your priority pass email along with your dedicated link, which leads you directly to the upload page, and I also hope that you found useful video we are playing before the meeting. This 6-minute instructional video explains both how to upload statements and how our online conference system works, and it's being played before the meeting and also during the break. Please be sure to include the name of your country or organization and the agenda item on the first page of the statement that is uploaded. Participants are encouraged to allow their statements to be posted on the meeting page. Please note that statements will be posted online on the meeting page once they have been delivered by the respective parties and registered observers, subject to the agreement of the parties and observers concerned. The website will be updated accordingly each day. Statements will not be posted in advance of delivery. However, once the agenda item is complete, in the case that not all statements of observers are presented orally because of lack of time, those statements that have been provided in good time will be posted, again, subject to agreement of the observer concerned. We are informed that some statements were made public even though the party specified otherwise at the time of upload. The issue has now been rectified for all statements uploaded after February 23, noontime. Please inform the Secretariat if any remaining discrepancies by email to statements@cbd.info. And we apologize for any inconveniences. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Secretariat, can you hear me? Yes, good. Yes. Dear colleagues, good day, and thank you, Ezekiel, for that introduction and for giving me the floor. So it's a pleasure to be with you today to continue to chair this session on item 5 of the SBSTTA-24 provisional agenda, which we began last Friday. So when we adjourned last Friday, we had the following parties to the Cartagena Protocol on the list of speakers. First, Sweden, then Jordan, Belarus, Italy, Malawi, China, Belgium, Switzerland, and Cuba. We did our best to record those who requested the floor, but if we missed any, you will have the opportunity to request the floor once I reopen the queue. Please do not raise your hand now. Rest assured that all parties will have an opportunity to speak. I will call on the parties in the queue individually, so please raise your hand only when I call your name. Please remember that statements should not exceed 3 minutes, and please slowly and clearly so that the interpreters can follow you. I will now take the first intervention from Sweden, followed by Jordan, and then Belarus. Sweden, please raise your hand. You have the floor.
Done.
There we go. Yep.
Yes. Is the microphone on now?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chair. Sweden supports the statements of the European Commission, Portugal, and other European countries. In the interest of saving time, we will not reiterate all the points that our European colleagues have so eloquently stated. We will mention only the two most crucial points for us. There is a great and immediate need for developing robust guidance materials for risk assessment of engineered gene drives, primarily in the areas where research and development are most advanced. Therefore, we propose to focus the guidance primarily on living modified mosquitoes that contain engineered gene drives, but we are open to include other insects. We should, however, remember that engineered gene drives are also being considered for eradication of invasive alien species. Sweden considers it vital for the quality of the guidance materials that experts from relevant international organizations with expertise in engineered gene drives and assessment of potential effects on biodiversity are invited to participate in the AUTEG. We will submit our statement in writing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sweden. So next on my list is Jordan, followed by Belarus and Italy. Jordan, please raise your hand. You have the floor. Jordan, please, you have the floor. Please raise your hand. Jordan, you have the floor. So it seems that Jordan is having some connection problems. I think we will go, they're not online, so we'll take Belarus now, and then Jordan can be given the floor later. Belarus, please raise your hand, you have the floor. Belarus, are you there? I think Belarus also has some problems, so then we'll ask Italy to be ready. Italy, if you're ready, please raise your hand. You have the floor.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm ready. Thank you, Chair, for giving the floor. Mr. Chair, Italy considers the draft recommendation a good starting point for discussion and thanks the Secretariat for its preparation. And I follow the example of Sweden, and I also would like just to say that Italy supports the statement made by the EU member states, but I also would like to make some consideration. The first one, Italy considers necessary to continue the work on risk assessment and risk management of LMOs under the Cartagena Protocol and welcomes the analysis done by the ATEC on the topics of living modified organisms containing engineered gene drives and of LM fish, and agrees on the need to develop additional guidance materials. In this context, Italy suggests to strongly take into account the recommendation of the ATEC regarding the development of additional guidance materials on LM organisms containing engineered gene drives. And lastly, Chair, Italy thinks that the future activities on risk assessment and risk management of LMOs will produce a lot of information from different sources. For this reason, it would be necessary to strengthen the BCH platform to collect this information and further promote its use as an instrument to improve capacity building and to facilitate the sharing of experiences on issues relevant to risk assessment of LMOs. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Italy. So next on my list is Malawi, followed by China and Belgium. Malawi, please raise your hand. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Malawi would like to support the statement presented by Ethiopia on behalf of Africa and has taken note of the recommendations made by the ATEC on risk assessment in document CBD/CP/RA/ATEC 2020/1/5. Chair, Malawi has taken note of the different views by different experts on the need for new guidance on risk assessment of living modified fish, as summarized by the ATEC in document CBD/CP/RA/ATEC 2020/1/5 from paragraph 18 to 22, and share the same views with the African statement of not prioritizing the new guidance on this living modified fish at this stage. However, there is need for capacity building on the existing risk assessment guidance on living modified animals. Secondary, Chair, Malawi supports the need for developing of guidance on risk assessment of living modified organisms containing engineered gene drive, as recommended by the ATEC on risk assessment in document CBD/CP/RA/ATEC 20/1/5, para 42. Considering the advanced research already done on gene drive mosquitoes and the challenges related to non-restriction movement of gene drive organisms after release, a guidance for such organism is required. Lastly, Chair, bearing in mind that this is not a negotiation meeting, Malawi wishes to support concerns in the statement by the African Group on the low visibility of the Cartagena Protocol on biosafety in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. The fact that there is no goal on biosafety in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, and yet it contributes to the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity, makes the protocol less visible than the Nagoya Protocol on access and benefit sharing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Malawi. Next on my list is China, followed by Belgium and Switzerland. China, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Can you?
下午好。
Yes, loud and clear. Please proceed.
好，谢谢。Thank you, Ms. Chair. Thanks to the Secretariat and ad hoc technical expert group on risk assessment for their work in developing the risk assessment guidelines of living modified fish and living modified organisms containing engineered gene drives. The guidance on risk assessment of living modified organisms can provide a reference for their risk assessment of modern biotechnology and its products, which will be of positive significance for the parties to strengthen the risk management of biotechnology and its products. China attaches great importance to research progress in risk assessment and management of living modified organisms and actively participates in online forum discussions. China agrees to include the risk assessment of living modified organisms containing engineered gene drives as the priority theme of the guidance, and supports to continue preparing the guidance materials by EdTech for risk assessment of LMO containing engineered gene drives. It is recommended to invite experienced parties to continue providing knowledge and information on risk assessment and risk management of new types of living modified organisms containing engineered gene drives, living modified fish, and etc. And Secretariat is recommended to strengthen communication with relevant international organizations and carry out extensive international cooperation, knowledge sharing, and capacity building to support parties to improve their risk assessment and risk management capabilities. Thank you, Ms. Chair.
Thank you very much, China. Next on my list is Belgium, followed by Switzerland and Belgium. Please raise your hand. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Belgium would like to express its gratitude to you and Secretariat for organizing this informal session to initiate discussions and thinking about risk assessment and risk management of LMOs containing engineered gene drives. We agree with others that this is an important issue, and we welcome the progress that has been made since COP9. We are keen to keep progressing this work and would like to express our support to build the necessary capacity, increase cooperation, and improve knowledge management in order to timely address the needs voiced by parties on issues of risk assessment of LMOs containing engineered gene drives. We agree not to develop guidance materials on living modified fish at this stage and encourage parties to promote international cooperation, knowledge sharing, and capacity building, and to make use of existing guidance materials. Belgium attaches great importance to the precautionary principle as described in Principle 15 of the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development. We consider it is important that additional guidance materials that are being developed are of high technical and scientific quality, and that they are useful and applicable, especially for those parties that need them most. Therefore, Belgium is flexible with respect to the process to be implemented and can be flexible on the exact format and procedures intended to warrant the necessary expertise. In order to ensure a successful output, we would suggest that a small panel of experts with specific expertise in drafting guidance materials on risk assessment of living modified organisms containing engineered gene drives, such as mosquitoes, is tasked with the development of the future guidance for this issue. Cooperation with other international organizations is important, and in order not to duplicate any work and to ensure a coherent approach across different organizations. Chair, dear colleagues, we are looking forward to discuss this item further in the future, and we would like to note that the views expressed here are provisional, reserves the right to adapt them in the future. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much, Belgium. So last on my current list is Switzerland, followed by Cuba. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Esteemed delegate, ladies and gentlemen, and Mr. Chair, Switzerland would like to thank the ATEC and the SBSTTA Secretariat for their work and for the elaboration of the documents under consideration. Switzerland acknowledges the guidance as crucial tools to implement a precautionary approach as agreed upon the CBD and the Cartagena Protocol. And Switzerland supports the development of our guidance under the Cartagena Protocol to ensure a harmonized level of biosecurity between the parties, which is, on our point of view, very important, and to ensure the safe handling, transport, and use of living modified organisms, with the aim to prevent adverse effects on biological diversity and taking into account also risks to human health. Switzerland welcomes the work and the recommendation of the ATEC, taking into account the nature and type of use of organisms containing engineering drive, and also considering the high risk that, when released, they will spread across borders, affecting biodiversity on a wider scale. Switzerland strongly supports the development of a guidance and recommendation on gene-drive organisms. Switzerland recommends a coordinated approach and synergies between COP-MOP to the Cartagena Protocol with the issue and processes under the item 4 synthetic biology, as they are two interlinked processes. Having said that, Switzerland reiterates its intention under the item 4 synthetic biology regarding the living modified organisms that contain engineered gene drive. Switzerland, therefore, is the opinion that as long as risks and benefits cannot be correctly assessed, as long as risk management measures cannot be correctly set into force, it is necessary to refrain releasing LMOs containing gene drive to avoid irreversible effects to the biodiversity and unintended transborder movements, and that on a case-by-case basis. Switzerland therefore supports further work of the ATEC to develop further guidance for conducting risk assessment in the future, and in particular the proposed guidance on organisms containing engineered gene drive as proposed. Switzerland has sent its comment in written, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Switzerland. So now this concludes my list of parties in the room. If any other party to the Cartagena Protocol would like to take the floor, please press the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen, which will turn yellow. Your request will be entered in the queue list. When I give you the floor, your microphone will be activated. The status bar will turn red on your computer, and you may start to speak immediately. So now, if there are any parties to the Cartagena Protocol that would like to take the floor, please press the raise hand button. So, please proceed doing that, and while you do that, we give the floor to Cuba. Cuba, please raise your hand. You have the floor. Cuba, please raise your hand. You have the floor. Cuba, can you hear me? Yes. Can you hear me, Cuba? You have the floor.
Sí, ¿me escuchan?
Can you hear me? Thank you very much, Chairman. On this intervention, we believe that when it comes to developing this, we need to have risk assessment with a solid scientific basis that should be implemented on a case-by-case basis. This is very important. We need to have results in developing countries such as Cuba also. Recently, we set up the National Commission for the Use of Living Modified Organisms in Agriculture to look at having safe conditions and having responsible scientific knowledge and other mechanisms to help with sustainability in the country. In this way, we can reinforce the risk assessment processes at a national level when it comes to producing food. With this National Commission, we want to have a coordinated and safe way of integrating this alternative in our agricultural field, to help with drought or also with soil changes due to an increase in sea level and the impact on production. So we need to have risk assessment on maize and transgenic soya. That is at the basis of this programme. We recognise the work that has been done by the Secretariat for the online forum with the open-ended approach in 2020 so that we could review the studies on risk assessment of LMOs containing engineered gene drives and other modified species. Cuba supports that for the moment the proposal that we should not have work on living modified fish. We consider that we should give priority to better understanding this topic and capacity building, the exchange of experience and having guidance material on this. We do, however, believe that we should set up an ATEG to draw up additional guidance material on risk assessment for LMOs containing engineered gene drives. These organisms bring with them a great deal of uncertainty, and so we need to have assessments and we need to establish monitoring actions as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cuba. We now heard from Belarus that they have some connection problems, but they will put in their statement in writing. So please refer to the statement from Belarus in writing. I see no more requests from parties to the Cartagena Protocol for the floor, and will now open the floor for interventions by other parties. So if parties, non-parties to the Cartagena Protocol would like to have the floor on this item, please raise your hand. Thank you. Argentina, please, you have the floor. Argentina, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Please proceed.
Okay. Gracias, señor presidente, por darnos la palabra.
Chair, for giving me the floor. And as we said, this intervention is a preliminary and informal one. On this agenda item, we want to share the following comments. On the statements made by ATEG in Annex 1 to the decision CP 9/13 on the process for identification and prioritisation of specific scientific aspects of risk assessment, Argentina has taken note of this. We consider it's important to point out that this process should focus on examining technologies that are in the development stage. On the proposal to set up a new ATEG, this time to develop additional guidance on risk assessment for LMOs containing engineered gene drives, we note with concern that the ATEGs and other ad hoc groups that have been held to date have taken many years to produce guidance on risk assessment, and when this guidance was finalised, we were not able to reach consensus between all of the parties. On this matter, we recommend carrying out a detailed analysis of this experience and consider other mechanisms to meet this need to facilitate production of science-based risk assessments. Notwithstanding the above, if the parties do agree to move ahead with an ATEG on this topic, Argentina recommends including the following aspects in the terms of reference. Firstly, we suggest that the composition of the ATEG should include experts directly involved in the work with engineered gene drives, as well as those who are specialised on conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. Secondly, we recommend that ATEG, based on the established practice, should be set up for a time-limited period, preferably up to COP-MOP11, where we should consider its results. Finally, in order to avoid any legal uncertainty, ATEC should seek to compile the appropriate scientific information to be able to differentiate the LMOs, including engineered gene drives, from those that we've been working on for over 30 years. Argentina looks forward to continuing to work with the parties in the Cartagena Protocol in the discussions on this agenda item. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any other parties that would like to have the floor on this item? I see no requests for the floor from other parties. Russia, please raise your hand. You have the floor.
Благодарю, господин председатель. В отношении поднимаемых вопросов об оценке рисков.
When we discuss the issues of risk and biodiversity, when live modified organisms are released, Russia would like to say that aquaculture, fish and crustaceans, which are released into the environment, we suggest that semi-contained systems are used where there is no other interaction with the environment. This includes seaweed that is genetically modified if they are grown where there are bioreactors, contained systems. The simplest way to achieve risk reduction for biodiversity preservation is to make microorganisms sterile in the event they are to be used in open or semi-contained systems. For agricultural plants, the risks are assessed individually in each case, depending on the receiving environment. However, it is assumed that cultivated and wild plants have practically no interaction, while the impact of GM varieties on wild species outside of dedicated agroecosystems is less than the potential impact of traditional agricultural crops, thanks to GM crops lacking competitive advantages and being less resilient to other environmental factors in the wild. Multi-year testing that accounts for gene drive risks and vertical and horizontal gene transfer is required to assess the risk in each individual case. Genetically engineered products should not be released in protected areas as per the principle of preserving the environment with as little interference as possible. Preservation of endangered species using genetic engineering is of relevance in contained systems without reintroduction. However, with the science at its current level of development, a top priority would be full-scale sequencing of rare species, genome analysis, and preservation of the genome as a source of information about the unique properties of entities of biodiversity. Generally speaking, we believe that gene drive technologies are not intended for use in open systems. In conclusion, we note that comprehensive investigation of the biological and environmental characteristics, not only of LMOs, but also of other species, as well as the in-depth study of the structure and functioning of natural ecosystems and, to varying degrees, human-modified ecosystems, should facilitate reduction of the risk to biodiversity in the event of release into the open environment. It is quite evident that we currently lack this knowledge as we transition to seeking practical solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Russia. So we will now move to interventions from non-parties, followed by organizations, beginning with major groups. So I see no request from non-parties. I would now like to open the floor for interventions by representatives of the major stakeholder groups. Each statement should not exceed 5 minutes. Representative of Indigenous peoples and local communities, please raise your hand. Ms. Jennifer Caucus, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I am making this statement on behalf of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. We thank the Secretariat for its intensive preparatory work and for the documents under this agenda item. Indigenous peoples have participated actively in the intersessional process, including the online forum and the ATTEG. For Indigenous peoples, Mother Earth and nature are alive and sacred. When we make decisions that will affect our mother's body, we must treat her with the same dignity and respect we would afford our own families, as her health ultimately affects the health of all our families. The known and unknown risks posed by unregulated scientific and technological development, specifically the release of LMOs with engineered gene drives,
有着基因驱动改变生物体的释放，会有比较大的，而且不可逆转的，有可能对人类健康和环境产生负面的影响的这种结果。因此呢，我们要保护生态系统，土著社区的生态食物粮食系统，都应该考虑到当地的人们的知识，考虑到我们的文化。正如呢，在我们专家小组内讨论的那样，这个带有基因驱动的改性生物体在环境释放之前的这个行为啊，应该是可以预测的。而现在呢，风险的分析会有一些高度的不确定性，是不是对环境产生负面的影响？因此，我们强烈支持这个谨慎的这种做法来处理带有基因驱动的改性生物体，就是根据14协限19号的缔约方大会的决定，以及这一点，尤其是各方和其他的政府都应该考虑，在环境中引入。载有基因驱动的改性生物体的时候，要进行性的分析，包括环境的研究，出于研究和这个研发目的的，或者试验目的，必须要有以基于科学基础的、合理的、逐案的风险的分析，进行风险管理，来减少它产生的负面的影响，并且应该保证了土著人民的自由、事先和知情的同意。另外，我们应该建立一个强有力的监管的机制，来促进科学的合作，考虑土著者知识、技术方面的合作和长期的能力建设。这方面的工作必须是参与性的和包容性的。这个机制必须
of Indigenous peoples, including free, prior, and informed consent, full and effective participation at all levels, including for Indigenous women and youth. Finally,
和青年。最后呢 ，IFB 呢支持特赦专家组的建议，制定额外的这个指导原则。我们认为有必要进一步的来这个阐述一下。
In accordance with Decision 14/19, the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples in the ATTEG should be ensured. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, IPLCs. So now there was an issue with the translation, especially the English translation here. And I'm very sorry for that, but in the best interest of time, I think I encourage all of you to read the written statement put in by IPLCs. Thank you. And now let us continue with the next statement. I would like to hand the floor to a representative on behalf of women's organization, Ana Di Pangrazio from Fundación Ambiente y Recursos Naturales. Please raise your hand. You have the floor. Farn, please raise your hand. You have the floor. They seem not to be connecting at the moment. Farn, are you there? We'll try to get them connected in a while. Let's see if I can give the floor to our representative of non-governmental organizations, Ms. Lim Li Ching of the CBD Alliance. Please raise your hand. You have the floor. Ms. Lim Li Ching of the CBD Alliance. Please raise your hand. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Can you hear and see me?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you. I can see you as well.
Thank you. I make this statement on behalf of the CBD Alliance, which gathers a diverse range of views and proposals from civil society. Chair, there are fundamental risk assessment challenges for living modified organisms, including living modified fish, as listed in the ARTEC report. The modification of wild organisms, such as fish, introduces the potential for next generation effects as the organisms persist over time and space. Such increases in spatial and temporal complexities, along with fundamental knowledge gaps, as acknowledged by the ARTEC, increases uncertainty. We therefore agree with the ARTEC members who saw clear need and rationale for guidance on risk assessment to be developed on living modified fish. We support the intervention of Mexico in this regard. The ARTEC also acknowledged that LMOs containing engineered gene drives pose specific challenges to risk assessment due to their invasive design to spread and persist in wild populations. This presents a potentially irreversible threat to biodiversity, which is compounded by the inability to control or recall the gene drive after release. Gene drives have potential next-generation effects. The inclusion of genetic engineering machinery that will continue to perform genetic engineering at every generation in genetically diverse wild populations raises specific challenges due to the potential for unintended effects to occur over time, as also acknowledged by the ARTEC. Evolutionary processes make it possible to turn events with a low probability of ever happening into events that are likely to happen. Inherent knowledge can thereby increase to such an extent that the conclusiveness of risk assessment is severely affected. We support the conclusion of the ARTEC that current risk assessment frameworks are insufficient for LMOs containing engineered gene drives. Given their invasive nature and inability to control, recall, or reverse them, we actually call for an immediate global moratorium on the release, including experimental release into the environment of such organisms. However, we support the development of guidance on risk assessment and say that this has to fully operationalize the precautionary principle to protect against the potential irreversible damage to biodiversity and acknowledge the serious challenges to risk assessment of LMOs containing engineered gene drives. If it is likely that such organisms can escape spatiotemporal controllability, the risk assessment cannot be sufficiently reliable because it's not conclusive. Under such circumstances, the environmental release of such organisms is not compatible with the precautionary principle. The work of the ARTEC, developing guidance on risk assessments for LMOs containing engineered gene drives, must build on and complement existing CBD decisions on organisms containing engineered gene drives. Inter alia, applying a precautionary approach, obtaining the free, prior, and informed consent of potentially affected Indigenous peoples and local communities, and assessing the socio-economic, cultural, and ethical impacts. Furthermore, we remind all of the procedure for avoiding or managing conflicts of interest adopted by parties and as contained in COP Decision 14/33 and COP Decision 9/10, and the necessity of applying these procedures to the ARTEC developing guidance and any small groups thereof. It is also essential that there is effective participation of IPLCs in the ARTEC. Finally, given the rapid technology developments, including of LMOs produced through genome editing, it is urgent that additional guidance materials on risk assessment continue to be developed, taking into account priorities identified by parties. Chair, we are aware that our civil society colleagues from Africa have also asked for the floor and kindly ask that you provide them an opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I would like the floor to give the floor to a representative from youth, from Mr. Julian Lowe, Curlo, or Joseph Atauli. Please raise your hand. You have the floor, and after that we'll hear the foreign statement. Thank you. Please, you have the floor, youth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We understand that the impacts of gene-drive organisms are likely to be irreversible. That is why there is an urgent need for effective internationally and legally binding regulation of gene-drive organisms. While the existing biosafety rules established for genetically modified organisms do cover gene-drive organisms, these are not specific enough to make the unique risks of these organisms released into the environment, with both socioeconomic and biological impacts that spread across national borders, across species, and across generations. For this reason, we emphasize the importance of inclusive decision-making in relation to the risk assessment process. Gene-drive applications will require public consultation and should respect the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. Processes must also consider ethical issues associated with potential risks from organisms containing engineered gene drives. Regarding living modified fish, it has been recognized that these organisms pose fundamental challenges for risk assessment due to increased uncertainties regarding next generation effects, resulting from gene flow into wild populations across national borders. We would like to remind everyone of the importance, as highlighted by the experts of the ATEC, of many wild fish species to indigenous peoples and local communities, and the relationship between indigenous peoples and local communities and biodiversity. In this regard, it would be very important to consider the sociocultural impacts related to the adverse effects on native populations resulting in modified fish, ensuring the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples and local communities. The ATEC recognized that while existing risk assessment methodology might still be applicable for LMOs containing engineered gene drive, there are specific technical or methodological challenges to doing so. This includes lack of data, limited applicability of some aspects of risk assessment methodologies, lacks of guidance on how to assess uncertainty, lack of validating modeling tools, and lack of experience or capacity. The ATEC also noticed that LMOs containing engineered gene drives have the potential to result in an irreversible impact on biodiversity, health, and livelihoods at various scales up to the global level, and international cooperation might be required for risk assessment. We strongly believe that all these gaps need to be assessed before considering the release of LMOs containing gene drives into the environment. We want to emphasize that any guidance on risk assessment has to fully operationalize the precautionary principle to protect against the potential irreversible damage to biodiversity and acknowledge the serious challenges to risk assessment for LMOs containing engineered gene drives. If it is likely that such organisms can escape spatio-temporal controllability, the risk assessment cannot be sufficiently reliable because it's not conclusive. Under such circumstances, the environmental release of such organisms is not compatible with the precautionary principle. Finally, we think that the work of the Convention and the Cartagena Protocol has to be coordinated and complementary regarding the gene-drive organisms, addressing this from a broader perspective and not just from the perspective of the risk assessment. In this regard, we strongly suggest that the work of the ATEC builds on and complements CBD decisions, including the precautionary approach, ensuring free, prior, informed concerns of potentially affected indigenous peoples, and assessing cultural, environmental, ethical, and socioeconomic impacts of any kind of release of gene-drive organisms into the environment. The work of this risk assessment ATEC will be fundamental to create stronger guidelines on all of these aspects, and this is why we suggest to have the full and effective participation of representatives from right holders as IPLCs, women, and youth in their discussions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, youth. We'll now hear the intervention from women's organization, FARN. FARN, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. See, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. On behalf of the CBD Women Caucus, we would like to draw attention to certain aspects identified by the ad hoc technical expert group in hope that they will be strongly taken into consideration given living modified organisms application and rapid development. A precautionary approach must be adopted and relevant and appropriate guidance be developed on risk assessment to ensure protection of the lives and health of IPLCs, who might be more directly impacted and bear the costs of potential irreversible damage. The history of science and technology is rich with examples of well-intentioned advances having unintended consequences. The ad hoc has acknowledged many, the AdTech, has acknowledged many specific challenges related to the risk assessment of living modified fish. This must be taken seriously, including the importance many wild fish species have for the livelihoods and food security of IPLCs. We urge parties to take note of the need to consider socio-cultural impacts related to adverse effects on native fish populations resulting from the release of living modified fish and the need to ensure IPLC's participation, including FPIC. We agree with the expert group on the need for clear guidance on risk assessment, given that living modified fish have the potential to spread across national borders, with serious implications on biodiversity and the livelihoods of IPLCs, including women and youth. We also highlight the importance of proper assessment of potential risk from the release of organisms containing engineered gene drives, as they have the potential to impact indigenous territories, biocultural and subsistence resources, and traditional and customary practices. Support, including financial resources, should be mobilized for capacity building and knowledge management tools on these very technical and scientific issues to ensure full, meaningful, and effective participation of IPLCs, women, and youth at all levels of planning and decision-making. Governments, organizations, and scientists must be proactive and create policies and guidelines which incorporate potential transboundary effects and unintended consequences. Ensuring full and effective participation of IPLCs, women, youth, and other relevant right holders in related decision-making processes. The future of life on Earth depends on our collective efforts to safeguard biodiversity together. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I will now invite other observers to take the floor. So please raise your hand if you'd like to take the floor on this agenda item. I see we already have an NGO, ABC, that wants the floor. ABC, please raise your hand. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you. We are making this intervention from civil society organizations in Africa, representing millions of small-scale farmers across the continent and have a 20-year biosafety track record. First, we support Mexico's position calling for further risk assessment guidance on enemy fish. In regard to gene-drive organisms, we call for a global moratorium on their release, given the enormous uncertainty, unpredictability, and threats these pose to entire social and ecological systems, as well as their major geopolitical implications. Target Malaria, as one example, is preparing to release GDOs to apparently eradicate malaria in Africa. The first phase of its project has been a dismal failure involving the release of GM mosquitoes. We have witnessed human-strained capacity on the part of regulatory authorities, a lack of experience, transparency, and compliance with the CBD and Cartagena Protocol, and most disturbing, the alleged human rights violations. FPIC intervention by the project included the use of intimidation and fear, driving conflict, dividing communities based on false promises. The limited public participation, dubious tactics, and silencing of communities illustrates their failure to ensure genuine FPIC. We point out that according to the ATEC report, that it is not possible to control, recall, nor predict the impact of a GDO prior to release. We are thus not able to robustly nor reliably assess such risks. In order to mitigate the effects of GDOs, this will involve the release of yet more gene drives. So at what point does that stop, and what is the logic driving this agenda? While we do not support the release of GDOs, we support more scientific and socioeconomic discussions on the issue. Here we will need to set parameters for such guidance. Specifically, we call for cutoff criteria to be included in any further guidance as a mechanism to operationalize the precautionary principle, which would be a step to allow for stopping the risk assessment process when uncertainty is too high and therefore unacceptable. Such a mechanism recognizes that biological novelties of gene drives, which move from releases of engineered organisms to the release of genetic engineering tools into the wild, effectively transferring the laboratory to the field, and as such cannot be defined as a finished product, nor can its interaction with the environment be pre-assessed. Crucially, risk assessment must go beyond pure science-based risk assessment, as people have diverse relationships with their environment. We support continuity of the ATEC to develop this guidance, seeking a well-balanced representation of IPLCs and small-scale food producers, and especially those parties in developing countries that will be affected by the releases. Finally, we call for developing modalities for FPIC, appropriate to regions and interest groups, which must include respect for the right to say no on the part of affected communities. This cannot take place outside of the remit of the CBD and stakeholders, and here we mention the work being done by Target Malaria and the Research and Development Agency of the United States Department of Defense, who are developing separate guidelines for GDO releases. This is deeply worrying. We caution developers that are seeking to release gene drive organisms that if they seek to release before guidance is in place, this will be viewed as done in bad faith and is completely unacceptable, and as this will undermine the CBD and all the good work we are trying to do to discharge our respective mandates. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Next on my list is Imperial College London. Imperial College London, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I speak on behalf of the Outreach Network for Gene Drive Research that aims to raise awareness of the value of gene drive research for public good, such as fighting invasive species or providing a complementary tool to fight vector-borne epidemics. We would like to thank the members of the IPLC group for their time and for the information shared during the recent useful and constructive dialogue that we had on gene drive research. We wish to reiterate our interest in engaging IPLCs in research and in discussion around gene drive. We recognize and value their knowledge and believe that IPLCs should be consulted and involved in the early days of research when their land or resources could be affected, as should other affected populations. This is not understood to detract from the obligation for researchers to abide by the requirements of FPIC, which we are committed to respect when research may directly impact IPLC's rights to natural resources and their sustainable use. To reference the discussion that took place in relation to synthetic biology, we wish to reiterate that gene-drive organisms are living modified organisms, as noted by several countries during these informal SBSTTA sessions. As such, the provisions of the Cartagena Protocol apply to them. All gene-drive organisms should be subjected to a risk assessment on a case-by-case basis before any release in the environment, as are all LMOs. This was clearly stated and agreed at COP14, and we hope that the discussions relative to gene drive can now progress under the umbrella of the Cartagena Protocol and remain under a single track. It is also important to note that work on guidance for responsible gene drive research has progressed since COP14 and since the ATEC met, and that these elements should be taken into consideration. For example, the WHO is preparing to release an update of its guidance on genetically modified mosquitoes that will address gene drive. Furthermore, regulatory experts in the West African region are also in the phase of developing a regional mechanism for assessing new vector control tools that would also include gene drive organisms. Finally, while these discussions on risk assessment are timely and important to the establishment of a clear framework in which research can take place, we want to emphasize the fact that releases of engineered gene drive organisms, including experimental purpose, are still years away, and we look forward to the discussion at SBSTTA-24. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Imperial College. So I see no more requests for the floor. As previously explained, there will be no conference room papers stemming from this informal session. Together with the chair of SBSTA, the Secretariat will prepare a short procedural report on the informal session, noting the parties and observers that have made interventions. We will continue now straight to the next agenda item, item 6, chaired by Ms. Mary May Mungasele of the Seychelles. I thank the chair and my colleagues in the Bureau for giving me the opportunity to chair, and I thank you all for your cooperation. Thank you very much.
Also, dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are in the world. It's a pleasure for me to be chairing this session. We will be looking at marine and coastal biodiversity and ecologically or biologically significant marine areas under item 6 of the SBSTTA-24 provisional agenda. To begin, I'll give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce the item. Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. On item 6, the Secretariat has prepared document CBD/SBSTA/24/6 on marine and coastal biodiversity. The subsidiary body will be invited to consider the draft recommendations in this document. In addition, the subsidiary body will have before it 9 information documents related to this agenda item, as shown on the screen. Please also note that there is a presentation to introduce this agenda item available on the meeting documents page for this session, as shown on the screen. The presentation is entitled, "What is the Ocean We Want? Working Towards an Ocean Positive Future" by Mr. David Obira of Cordio, East Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. I now open the floor for interventions on item 6, marine and coastal biodiversity, starting first with the regional groups, followed by parties, major groups, and then observers. I will take the interventions from the regions. First off, the African region. African region, I believe Seychelles, you have the floor. Please raise your hand to be given the floor. Seychelles, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. I can't see you though.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Seychelles, I can't seem to hear you.
Yes, I'm trying to apologies for that. Seychelles speaks on behalf of the African group. It is our understanding that this informal virtual meeting is not a negotiation and that parties reserve the right to make amendments or introduce new issues as appropriate when formal negotiations resume. We thank the Secretariat for the preparation of document CBD/SBSTA/24/6 on marine and coastal biodiversity. The African group has reviewed the progress and has been presented on ecologically or biologically significant marine areas, or EBSAs, as well as on other matters. We noted with interest the compilation of submissions on experiences in the implementation of marine spatial planning. Therefore, the African group is supportive of the first target of the post-2020 biodiversity framework,
Okay, it seems we've lost connection with Seychelles.
Potentially an extremely useful spatial tool to inform players from the perspective of marine biodiversity, to secure adequate management and regulation for areas and features of high biodiversity importance and ecosystem services. Some South African parties have recently identified new EPSAs and made adjustments and refinements to existing EPSA descriptions and delineations, taking into account new data and spatial analytical tools. And in order that they may be better inform marine spatial planning processes. We just welcome the proposal.
Seychelles, we are having a really, really bad time trying to make out what you're saying. So we will take on someone else, and then we'll try and get back to you and see if the connection improves thereafter. So I will call upon Central and Eastern Europe region. Turkmenistan, you have the floor. Can you please raise your hand? Turkmenistan. Okay, I don't seem to see them online. Okay, so I will move on to the parties, and then eventually if they come on, we will call them for the regional statements. So I open the floor now to parties. Okay, I will take the first intervention from Ukraine, followed by Germany and Brazil. Ukraine, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, I am speaking on behalf of the region instead of Turkmenistan because it's have very bad internet connection.
Okay.
I would like to read the following statement on behalf of the region. We, representative of the region, appreciate the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity progress in preparation of reports on ecologically and biologically significant marine areas, including identifying options for modifying descriptions of EBS-A and for describing new areas, establishment of an informal advisory group for these areas, report of other matters, including process for the preparation of the post-2020 targets to facilitate the implementation of this process. The thematic workshop on marine and coastal biodiversity, which was held in Montreal in 2019 as part of 2020 Ocean Pathway Week, produced proposal of the zero draft to be considered in the development of the post-2020 target. We appreciate also a draft CBD technical series report on the impact of anthropogenic underwater noise on marine and coastal biodiversity and habitats, tools and approaches to minimize and mitigate these impacts. This report builds on the scientific synthesis of the impacts of underwater noise on marine and coastal biodiversity and habitats. We support requests of the Executive Secretary for preparation of the draft terms of reference for a relevant expert advisory group in the context of modalities for modifying description of EBSAS and describing use areas on the Caspian and the Black Seas. We endorse annexes 1 to 14 of the documents addressing modalities for modifying descriptions of ABSA and for describing new areas, and kindly request the Executive Secretary to facilitate the implementation of these modalities. A regional group of CE states support request the Executive Secretary to develop voluntary guidelines on peer reviews process for the identification of area meeting of EBSA criteria and other relevant compatible and complementary scientific criteria for the consideration of COP. We would like to mention the progress of Turkmenistan for nomination of 3 EBSAs on the Caspian Sea in 2019. There are also other countries in CE region who nominate this area in the Caspian and the Black Seas. We welcome the report of thematic workshop on marine and coastal biodiversity for post-2020 global biodiversity framework and request the Executive Secretary to conduct a strategic review and analysis of the POW on marine and coastal biodiversity in the context of implementation of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. We ask to continue of the work on the compilation and synthesis of information on impacts of anthropogenic underwater noise, marine debris on marine and coastal biodiversity, and means to minimize and mitigate these impacts. Experiences with the application of marine spatial planning. The CE region welcomes cooperation between the FAO, IUCN, and Executive Secretary to support efforts to mainstream biodiversity consideration in fisheries, and request the Executive Secretary to continue this cooperation. Region welcome the capacity building and partnership activities through the Sustainable Ocean Initiative at the national, regional, and global levels, and express gratitude to donor countries and many other partners for providing financial and technical support for the implementation of activities under Sustainable Ocean Initiative, and request the Executive Secretary to continue to facilitate capacity building activities under the Sustainable Ocean Initiative in order to facilitate implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework with respect to marine, coastal, and island biodiversity. We welcome the collaborative efforts to strengthen cross-sectoral cooperation at the regional scale in order to accelerate progress to achieve the Aichi biodiversity target and SDG, including through Sustainable Ocean Initiative global dialogue with regional seas, organizations, and regional fisheries bodies, and request the Executive Secretary to continue this collaboration in the context of implementation of post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Ukraine, on behalf of CE. I still can't see Seychelles back on, so we'll proceed to the parties. So Germany, you have the floor, followed by Brazil and Canada.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Germany would like to thank the CBD Secretariat for preparing the draft recommendation for marine and coastal biodiversity. With respect to EBSAs, ecologically or biologically significant marine areas, Germany supports the suggested modalities for modifying descriptions of existing EBSAs and for describing new areas, as outlined in the annexes of the recommendation. In some annexes, minor amendments could be made to clarify the described modalities. Germany will provide comments in writing. Germany would like to encourage all parties to take into consideration the scientific aspects of the EPSA process within the negotiations underway in the Intergovernmental Conference on an internationally legally binding instrument under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. In this respect, Germany would like to encourage all parties using the scientific information on ecological and biological features related to ecologically or biologically significant marine areas. From a general point of view, Germany would like to ask the open-ended working group on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework to stronger take into account the importance of marine and coastal biodiversity when developing the post-2020 global biodiversity framework to enhance the conservation, protection, restoration, and sustainable use of marine ecosystems. In this regard, Germany would like to encourage all parties, organizations, and stakeholders to contribute to strengthening the conservation of marine and coastal biodiversity. To stress the importance of the conservation of marine and coastal biodiversity, also in the suggested recommendation, Germany would like to suggest splitting the present draft recommendations into two separate recommendations. One on ecologically or biologically significant marine areas, currently Part A of the draft recommendation, and a second recommendation on conservation of marine and coastal biodiversity, currently Part B, Other Matters. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, Germany. I now give the floor to Brazil, followed by Canada and Finland.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Many thanks once again for convening this informal meeting. I will present some preliminary comments on behalf of Brazil on marine and coastal biodiversity, and our official position will be presented at the formal face-to-face meeting. Brazil would like to recall that the mandate of the Convention does not apply to areas beyond national jurisdiction, although we do recognize that the Convention could make valuable contributions to BBNJ discussions, in accordance with the UNGA Resolution 72/249. We must also make sure that discussions on access beyond national jurisdiction take into account the outcomes of the BBNJ Intergovernmental Conference. Regarding options for modifying the description of abscess, Brazil believes that the proposals presented in the document SBSTTA-24/6 still require further improvement. Brazil has consistently argued that procedures for modifying the description of abscess within national jurisdiction should not be the same as those applied to abscess beyond national jurisdiction. Coastal states must be given the opportunity to present updated information on abscess within national jurisdiction at any given time, take into account applicable national validation processes. In the case of abscess straddling areas within and beyond national jurisdictions discussed in Annex 9, updated information provided by the concerned party should not be subject to further review by an expert workshop, unless otherwise stated by the concerned party. With reference to the thematic workshop on marine and coastal biodiversity for the post-2020 GBF, we continue to be concerned that there has been insufficient focus on the specific challenges that undermine marine conservation and sustainable use. Future discussions on this topic must consider the significant knowledge gaps regarding species and habitat assessments. Similar gaps also remain in developing adequate methods to evaluate the cumulative effect of the multiple drivers of marine biodiversity loss. These capacity shortfalls could substantially hamper effective conservation planning and management and could set back efforts for spatial maritime planning as well. Regarding possible elements about the sustainable use of marine resources, Brazil takes the view that in addition to efforts to address overexploitation, we should also acknowledge the role of positive incentives to support sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, such as marine species recovery plans and frameworks. Finally, Brazil welcomes the draft CDB technical series about the impacts of anthropogenic underwater noise. Nonetheless, we understand there is still room for improvement. The section setting standards and guidelines at the international or national level could have provided a more inclusive overview of successful national and regional experiences, taking into account initiatives implemented in developing countries. Future research agendas should also focus on identifying technological constraints that affect the development of relevant policies. We look forward to continuing discussions on these topics. Many thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. I will now give the floor to Canada, followed by Finland just before we break we have the short break. So I will give the floor now to Canada. Canada, please raise your hand. I seem to have lost Canada on my list, so I will proceed to Finland. Finland, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, Finland stresses the need to send a strong message to the open-ended working group on the importance of marine and coastal biodiversity when developing the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. Marine biodiversity is still too weak in the proposed monitoring framework and in the proposed goals and targets. We urge to be reflected in the monitoring framework, including robust indicators. Finland proposes to take into account all pressures and threats to marine and coastal nature, as they are directly related to the marine nature, for instance underwater noise and seabed mining, as well as the effects of climate change. We support the ongoing negotiations on the international legal binding instrument under the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, and to be recognized in the EPSA process. Finland stresses the importance to enhance cooperation and synergies with the international and regional conventions on the ocean and climate nexus, in particular the UNFCCC. We also support the 30% goal on protected areas in the marine areas. Finland is part of the Global Ocean Alliance and the Blue Leaders 30 by 30 group. The present draft recommendation should be split into two separate recommendations, one on EPSAS, currently Part A, and a second on conservation of marine and coastal biodiversity, currently Part B, other matters. We find it important that the conservation of marine and coastal biodiversity is in the heading of the recommendation to highlight its own value, not as another matter. Finland continues to stress the importance of regional seas conventions when implementing the goals of the post-2020 GBF, especially in the marine areas. Finally, we also consider it important that existing programs of work for both marine and coastal, as well as for inland and island biodiversity, are, as a matter of urgency, updated for supporting the implementation of the post-2020 GBF. We will submit our written amendments to the recommendation to the Secretariat. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Finland. So colleagues, we will now take a 15-minute break. There is no need for you to log off during the break. We will reconvene at in another 15 minutes. My time is 8:29, so we will be back by 8:45. When we will continue to hear further interventions for the parties. For those of you who've raised your hands, we've taken notes, so please just leave them as they are. See you back in 15 minutes.
How to upload your statements to the CBD website, and how to request the floor on the virtual meeting platform. There are two options to upload your statements to the CBD website. First of all, in your Priority Pass email that you have received, you should see a link like this one here with your Priority Pass code written in there. The second option is by going to the meeting document page. Let us see what happens when I click on this link. We would land on this page. As you can see, the code is already entered, and here you would see your own code. There is an option here that you can click if you want this code to remain for the next time you rejoin this page. You have to choose a file to upload. In this case, we ask you if you can write your organization name, the session, and the agenda item directly here. The document should show on the top who is giving the statement, the session that we are in, and the agenda item as well. Thank you very much for this. This will help us a lot. So once I selected this document, I click open, and it's ready to be uploaded. Still have to choose the agenda item, choose the invasive alien species, number 10, choose the language. Here we give you the option, let us publish this information on the CBD website, or to refuse. We will not publish this information on the CBD website. We recommend you to choose yes, but in some cases you might want to choose no. Then I submit this document. Since the code is wrong on the top, it will not work. But with the correct code of the Priority Pass, you should see a window telling you the information has been uploaded successfully. I was mentioning a second option to upload the documents. You would go to the CBD homepage. The first carousel information here is our session of today, substyle SBI. Once there, you click on the SBSTTA-24 session. And here you find the upload statement button. You click on this button, we see the same window coming up, except that this time the priority pass number is not entered. But the rest of the window is exactly the same as previously, I described previously. In the second part of the presentation, I will show you how the Interactio platform works. In the middle of the screen on top, you have the selection button to select the language you want to hear. In our case here, during the presentation, I only have 2 options, but in your case, you will see several other options. On the bottom left of your screen, you have 3 little icons. The first one with a star, this means when you select it, you will see the speaker in front of you. The video will be bigger than the others. The second option with the little pin, the Secretariat can pin a few video channels. And in this case, they would show bigger than the others on your screen. And finally, third option, all the video channels will show the same on your screen. You can play with those options during the upcoming session, and you will see the one you prefer.
Okay. Welcome back, colleagues. Okay, so checking the list, seems we have over 20 countries to speak on this agenda item. So we'll proceed with the parties. I'm gonna invite to the floor Canada, followed by Portugal and Japan. Canada, you have the floor. Okay. It seems we've lost them again. So I'll give the floor to Portugal, followed by Japan.
Hello, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, distinguished delegates. Portuguese wishes to thank the SBSTTA Chair and the Secretariat for organizing this virtual meeting and for the preparation of all background document and information, namely document CBD/SBSTTA/24/6. First, we would like to consolidate conclusions from IPEB's report of 2019 Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Service, the IPCC Special Report of 2019 on the Ocean and Cryosphere in a Changing Climate, and the first United Nations Global Integrated Marine Assessment on the Impact of Climate Change and related change in the atmosphere on the oceans, which all unequivocally express the current scientific consensus about the climate emergency and the species extinction crisis. Their conclusions are alarming and It is with a strong sense of urgency in mind that we are addressing you today in the context of the Marine and Coastal Biodiversity discussion of SBSTTA-24. Being the ecological or biological significant marine areas a topic within the Marine and Coastal Biodiversity discussion, Portugal supports splitting the present draft recommendation into two. One, EBSA's, currently Part A of the present draft recommendation, and a second on conservation of marine and coastal biodiversity, currently Part B, other matters. Along these lines, and considering the importance of the topic under discussion about conservation of marine biodiversity within the post-2020 GBF, Portugal requests new paragraphs to be introduced in the present draft recommendation, in particular in Part B, namely on threats and pressures which are becoming increasingly harmful, as well as emerging pressures and threats that should be addressed. This includes several types of pollution, such as marine debris, plastic litter, and microplastics, which is in line with the resolution adopted by UNEA parties since 2014 on this issue, as also pesticides, untreated urban sewage hazards, substance in wastewater, underwater noises, as well as pressures coming from present and future activities, such as deep-sea mining and renewable energy production. Portugal underlines the importance of these issues to be considered in the future work of Convention. Portugal stresses the need to act for the protection of 30% of global ocean by 2030 through effective network of marine protected areas which are fully or strongly protected, guaranteeing the full participation and respect for the rights of indigenous people and local communities. Portugal supports the identification of options of updating and improving descriptions of EBSA and for describing new one areas. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Portugal. I would like to make a call for parties to try and stick to the 3 minutes, please. I would now give the floor to Canada. Please raise your hand for us to give you the floor. Canada. Canada, are you able to hear us at all?
Canada, please activate your microphone and camera at the bottom on your screen. You need to have both buttons, microphone and camera, in red. That means you are on. Canada, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I apologize for this. There was some confusion here in Canada. But honorable delegates and colleagues, I'm pleased to participate in this session and speak to you on behalf of Canada on this important item. It is critical that we better understand and address the main stressors on our marine and coastal ecosystems. In this regard, Canada is pleased with the focus on anthropogenic underwater noise, marine debris, coral reefs, cold water systems, and the sharing of experience and application of marine spatial planning. Accordingly, we support the draft recommendations under other matters. We cannot underestimate the cumulative effects of these pressures, especially when coupled with the effects of climate change. We need to accelerate our efforts to achieve both our sustainable use and conservation goals. Canada was pleased to hear the degree of widespread support at the OEWG for a target to protect 30% of land and ocean by 2030. It demonstrates that we take these challenges seriously. In regards to ecologically or biologically significant marine areas, EBSAs, Canada continues to be a strong advocate of this work. As the international community increasingly grapples with how to better manage our ocean spaces, having robust and credible scientific information and data will be critical. It is important that this information builds on the best available knowledge, kept up to date and accessible. And Canada is strongly supportive of options to enhance scientific methodologies and approaches on the description and modification of EBSAs. In this regard, Canada would like to thank the Government of Belgium for hosting the expert workshop last year and welcomes the report of that workshop. Canada is generally supportive of the proposed methodologies laid out in the annexes to this draft recommendation, as these attempt to provide clear guidance for how to add descriptions of new EBSAs or to modify existing ones. In our submission, Canada will provide some specific suggestions. To summarize, Canada suggests additional language in Annexes 1, 2, and 10 to specifically note traditional knowledge and its proper use, including consent. In regards to the process for describing or modifying EBSAs within national jurisdictions, Canada proposes some additional languages that clarifies that states can choose the CBD review process instead of or to augment their national processes. In Canada, we employ peer review processes that include the most appropriate and credible scientific methods and involve a range of expertise and perspectives within and external to the Government of Canada. As such, it is Canada's position that EBSAs within the Canadian jurisdiction do not require further peer review prior to posting on the information sharing mechanism or to the EBSA repository. However, this may not be the case with other CBD parties, and therefore it should be optional for parties that request it. Finally, Chair, Canada will include in our submission a couple of observations, including related to seeking better clarity on the scope and term of the Informal Advisory Group. We look forward to working with others on marine and coastal biodiversity issues in the upcoming SBSTA sessions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. I will now give the floor to Japan, followed by Mexico and the European Union. Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving the opportunity to share our views today. We appreciate the dedicated efforts of the Chair, the Secretariat, the participants in the expert workshop on the EBSAs, and all the people concerned to identify options for modifying the description of EBSAs and describing new areas. We would like to briefly explain Japan's view on the EBSAs since we have limited time today. We will send our detailed views to the Secretariat later. The first point is that it would be preferable to have the annexes be consolidated and simplified as much as possible, because the proposed 40 annexes are complicated by detailed case divisions. To be more specific, we would like to propose that the annex from 10 to 14 for describing a new EBSA be integrated with each correspondent Annex 4, and from 6 to 9 for modifying an existing EBSA. This is because the additional EBSA description can be considered either an amendment to the existing EBSA or a new separate description, and there is no clear difference between an amendment to the existing EBSA and a new description. It seems reasonable to divide the cases according to whether the area to be modified is within or beyond the national jurisdiction, not according to the location of the existing EBSA. Second, we think it is important to ensure that EBSAs will not be modified nor new descriptions be decided without the approval of each state. When an amendment to the existing EBSA or a new description is proposed, it is necessary to have multiple opportunities that allow the states concerned to be involved during the process. These are ensured by procedures through SBSTA and COP in the current system, and it is desirable that similar processes continuously be retained. We will submit our detailed comments on this agenda to the Secretariat later. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Japan. I now give the floor to Mexico, followed by EU and Norway.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I hear you.
Thank you. Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mexico will make the following comments on the marine topic. Firstly, the identification and determination of EBSAs is a scientific and technical exercise that will serve as the basis for developing activities aimed at the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity in these zones. We believe that experts should be included in the proposals to modify descriptions as well as the describing of new areas in order to maintain scientific accuracy. We agree with the setting up of an expert advisory group or body for describing new areas or modifying those that have already been established, although the nature and characteristics of this entity still need to be defined, given that the substantive recommendation and the COP use a different approach. Moreover, we're also in favour of developing voluntary guidelines on the peer review processes for the identification of areas meeting the EBSA criteria, while always respecting scientific and technical rigour. Mexico supports the annexes to the recommendation on the modalities for modifying descriptions of existing EBSAs or describing new EBSAs. For example, to include the results of scientific scoping and research that meet the established criteria as another reason for modifying an EBSA. Secondly, to consider the participation of the parties, other instruments, fora and organisations involved in areas beyond national jurisdiction. Thirdly, to specify that modification of the description of an EBSA should be on an open access basis established in a database and preferably obtained using best practices, and either through its inclusion in the information sharing mechanism or in the repository. Second main point, as regards the post-2020 global framework, partnerships should be formed with other initiatives, such as the UN Decade on Ocean Science for Sustainable Development 2021 to 2030, which offers support through its roadmap and objectives in order to pool resources and not duplicate efforts. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I will now give the floor to EU, followed by Norway. EU, you have the floor.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can hear you.
And there you go. Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished delegates, the EU delegation would like to thank the Secretariat for the organization of this informal meeting of SBSTTA-24 and for providing the draft recommendations for discussion. We support the statements provided by other EU member states, and we would like also to reiterate our thanks to the governments of Belgium and Germany for the organization and financing of the expert workshop to identify options for modifying the descriptions of ecological or biological significant marine areas and the descriptions of new areas which took place on February 2020 in Brussels. The workshop's results have greatly facilitated the drafting of the current recommendation and helped to unlock the situations we faced during the last COP14 in Egypt. As expressed by the delegate from Germany, the EU also supports splitting the present draft into two separate draft recommendations, one dealing with the EBSA process and the other one on conservation of marine and coastal biodiversity. We believe this will enhance the message we want to convey for both topics by addressing them specifically in separate recommendations. In order to improve the descriptions of EBSAs and for describing new areas, we propose several amendments in the annexes to clarify the identification and the modification procedure. Furthermore, we believe that the recommendations should refer to ongoing negotiations for the international legally binding instrument under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction. The EU would like to recall the sovereign rights of coastal states over their territorial sea as well as their sovereign rights and jurisdiction in the exclusive economic zones and continental shelf in accordance with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Thus, the EU wants to make clear that the outcome of the EPSA process should not prejudice the sovereignty, sovereign rights, or jurisdiction of coastal states or the rights of other states. The EU wants to stress the importance of conservation of marine biodiversity within the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. In particular, we want to mention threats and pressures which are becoming increasingly harmful, as well as concerning emerging pressures that should be addressed, as indicated by Portugal. The EU strongly believes that these issues should be included in the future work of the Convention, as well as the need to act for the protection of 30% of global oceans by 2030. Finally, the EU considers that within the post-2020 GBF, there are important marine aspects that can be implemented for monitoring and reporting at regional level. These can be well addressed through the regional monitoring programs in place to facilitate the state's work to achieve the targets and better align them with the ocean-related targets of the Agenda 2030. In this sense, the EU launched a joint project with UNEP on the role of regional sea conventions and action plans in the post-2020 GBF. The results of the study under this project provides ideas on how regional sea conventions could contribute with their monitoring program and on the basis of policies in place. This has been done taking into account the uneven capacity of all regional sea conventions and action programs and the needs for capacity building. We strongly believe that the findings may be of interest for considerations in our future discussions in view of facilitating the implementation of the future post-2020 GBF, and we invite all interested parties to consider its idea. We will submit our proposed amendments to the draft recommendation in writing to the Secretariat for further dissemination. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thanks, EU. I now give the floor to Norway, followed by South Africa and Colombia. Norway, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Secretariat for preparing the draft recommendations and all these documents describing the progress on the issues in this agenda item. For the work on ecologically and biologically significant marine areas, or EBSAs, has been going on for a long time. And we believe this is important and that it will give a good scientific basis for the development of management in areas beyond national jurisdiction in particular. Good quality and up-to-date scientific content developed in a transparent way is important to give the EBSA's integrity. It is therefore necessary to agree on a process for modifying existing descriptions of EBSAs and to further develop the process for describing new areas. We would like to highlight that for any national work on methods and approaches, including updating already reported EBSAs, it shall be up to each country how to do this, and this should be clearly reflected in the procedures. We believe that the modalities for updating and describing EBSAs, as suggested in the annexes to the recommendations, capture the challenges well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for saving us a little bit of time. I will now give the floor to South Africa, who will be speaking on behalf of the African group. South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. As you said, South Africa is speaking on behalf of the African group. We thank the Secretariat for the preparation of the document CBD SBSTTA-24/6 on marine and coastal biodiversity. The African group has reviewed progress that has been presented on ecologically or biologically significant marine areas, EBSAs, as well as on other matters. We noted with interest the compilation of submissions on experiences in the implementation of marine spatial planning, CBD SBSTTA-24/1. The Africa group is supportive of the first target of the post-2020 biodiversity framework on spatial planning which we believe provides valuable foundation and support for other targets. Several African parties are in the process of initializing marine spatial planning, or MSP, or are preparing for it. Scientific and technical EBSA descriptions and delineations that have been endorsed by the Conference of Parties are potentially an extremely useful tool to inform planners from the perspective of marine biodiversity to secure adequate management and regulation for areas and features of high importance to biodiversity and ecosystem services. Some African parties have recently identified new EBSAs and made adjustments and refinement to existing EBSA descriptions and delineations, taking into account new data and spatial analytical tools, and in order that they may better inform spatial planning processes. We thus welcome the proposed modalities for modification of description of EBSAs and for the description of new EBSAs, as provided for in the report of the expert workshop contained in CB document CBD EBSA WS/2020/1/2. We anticipate that this will shortly lead to resolution of a formal mechanism to revise existing EBSA descriptions contained in the repository and incorporate new EBSA descriptions from different regions. In the same vein, we support a recommendation to extend the term of the informal advisory group on EBSAs and to include tasks and responsibilities related to modifications to EBSAs and new EBSA descriptions in the TOR of the informal advisory group. The African group also appreciates the synthesis of experiences to achieve IT biodiversity target 10 for coral reefs and closely associated ecosystems, as contained in document CBD/SBSTTA-24/INF/2, and the technical paper updating CBD technical services number 83, contained in document CBD/24/INF/4. Coral reefs are amongst the most valuable ecosystems on Earth that provide vital environmental services for human well-being, as well as for livelihoods, economic opportunities, and provide coastal protection for millions of people in the region. An overwhelming majority of reefs in the West Indian Ocean experienced coral bleaching in 2016, resulting in a 20% regional decline in coral cover. Based on IPCC CMIP6 models under a business-as-usual scenario, the average year for severe annual bleaching conditions for coral reefs in the African region is estimated to be 2038. Impacts of marine heat waves on coral reefs are exacerbated by ocean acidification, increasing frequency and severity of tropical cyclones, and local problems such as overfishing, destructive fishing practices, and coastal development. We also acknowledge the threat to marine ecosystems from land and sea-based sources of pollution, such as the recent oil leakage from the oil carrier stranded off Mauritius, eutrophication, plastic litter, and others. Aggregate and increasing effects of these stresses are reducing the resilience of reefs and increasing their vulnerability to bleaching, disease, and invasive species. This in turn is resulting in a rapid loss of critical habitats for many species and loss and potential extinction of many species, as well as a loss of ecosystem services for society, jeopardizing the livelihoods of millions of people in the region. Many of the impacts above are more prominent in islands, and being a diverse group with island parties, we do support the program of work on island biodiversity. We recognize the urgent need to intensify our efforts to prevent degradation, to conserve and restore coral reefs, including through ambitious international action on halting biodiversity loss, as such as through agreement on delivery of the post-2020 global framework. The same applies to other marine and coastal systems that are under threat in large parts of the region, including mangroves, estuaries, and others. Conservation of this ecological infrastructure is essential for socio-economic well-being, of coastal well-being, and the safety of people living in vulnerable low-lying areas. Urgent local and regional actions and interventions must focus on building the resilience and recoverability of marine and coastal ecosystems, as well as
South Africa, can you please speed up, please?
To protect and almost finished, Chair, including through improved ICM management and catchment management, improved management of fishing areas and protected areas, and scaling up of efforts for protected areas. However, the international scale of many of these stresses, including climate change, commercial shipping, and foreign fishing fleets, emphasizes the need for global cooperation, management, monitoring, and mitigation efforts. Therefore, the themes addressed in this agenda item cut across many of the goals and targets proposed under the upcoming post-2020 framework. Therefore, marine and coastal biodiversity must be given an appropriate level of prominence. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you, South Africa, for this intervention. Once again, colleagues, I'd like to remind you to please stick to your time allocation so that we can allow more people to be given the floor on this item. So I now would like to call upon Morocco, followed by Sweden and Israel. Morocco, please raise your hand.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Morocco would like to thank the CBD Secretariat for all of the documents prepared, especially those under this item. It is so important, and congratulates the Secretariat for the quality and also the intrinsic value of this work. Morocco subscribes to the statement made on behalf of the African group and welcomes the spirit and hopes that all of the parties will have the opportunity to familiarize themselves with that statement. It is true that the process of the first identification and description of EBSAs marine EBSAs required a colossal effort on the part of the contracting parties and on the part of the Secretariat. However, as this is a new concept, it is certain that criteria have not been adopted or taken into account at this stage, and that certain EBSAs would not have been identified at this point. Also, there is reason to encourage a deeper collaboration between the Secretariat of the CBD and organizations involved in order to facilitate the identification of zones that meet the criteria of marine EBSAs. For these reasons, we consider it to be important to extend the mandate of the Informal Advisory Group on EBSAs, while at the same time calling upon subject experts to be able to modify the description of these zones and to also be able to identify and describe others. Regarding the question of marine debris, marine litter, and microplastics, it is undeniable that this is a worsening phenomenon globally and that its scale requires a considerable effort on the part of the international community to mitigate the negative effects of this scourge. It is all the same is true of submarine noise of human origin and spatial planning, marine spatial planning, for which the Executive Secretary is resolutely invited to pursue work on compiling and consolidating information on these issues. Morocco supports the first objective of the post-2020 global framework on land use planning, which, in our opinion, provides a basis and valuable support for other actions, particularly marine spatial planning. However, concerning the target for progress on spatial coverage of protected areas, particularly marine protected areas, we would like to draw your attention to the need not only to have a global indicator on the spatial coverage level, but also elements for surveillance and monitoring of protected spaces. Otherwise, their contribution will not help us
to fully realize the ambition of the global framework. Regarding the initiative on sustainable oceans and reminding all that Morocco held a workshop on capacity building in North Africa and the Mediterranean region, we would like to reiterate our calls for activities, capacity building and partnership activities facilitated by the Executive Secretary, particularly for North Africa and the Mediterranean region. And I'm so sorry that I went past the time allotted to me. Thank you.
Floor to Colombia, followed by Sweden and Israel. Colombia, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Colombia believes that marine and coastal biodiversity issues are key elements to the GBF. On this basis, we take note of the results of thematic consultation and consider that we should develop further work to improve knowledge on marine issues and strengthen scientific and innovation capacities for advancing in the sustainable use of marine resources and particularly the genetic resources. Healthy oceans require transitions to sustainable patterns of production and consumption. Therefore, the GBF should establish specific actions to address pollutions by plastic, chemicals, and other emerging pollutants, sustainable and legal fisheries, and regulated tourism, and expansion of the agricultural frontier. The GBF should also be articulated with other related processes, such as the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission and the UN Decade of the Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, with a view to achieving a clean, healthy, resilient, productive, and safe ocean. We also agree with the need to take up previous COP decisions, such as Decision 10/29, to deepen the understanding of the contribution of oceans to climate change mitigation and adaptation as a nature-based solution to address these and other social challenges. In the same way, the matters associated with governance and the effective participation of the relevant stakeholders, including, but not limited to local communities and indigenous people, as well as marine spatial planning articulated with the integrated management of coastal ecosystem, will be central in the GBF goals and targets. Also, Colombia, as a member of the High Ambition Coalition for Nation and People, fully supports the proposal to protect 30% of the planet's oceans, including other effective conservation measures. Regarding EPSAs, we do not agree with including in Annex 3 the modification to the EPSA criteria as a new reason for the modification of EPSA descriptions. We do believe that modifying such criteria could imply revising the already described EPSAs, which is something we would not recommend. Finally, Colombia reaffirms that the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea is not the only legal instrument governing all the legal activities carried out in the oceans and seas. The positions stated by Colombia in these regards do not affect its statutes or rights, nor can it be interpreted as a tacit or express acceptance of the provision of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, an instrument to which Colombia is not a party. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Colombia. I now give the floor to Sweden, followed by Israel and Spain. Sweden, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sweden would like to thank the Secretariat and the governments of Belgium and Germany for organizing and hosting the expert workshop to identify options for modifying the description of EPSAs and describing new areas. Building on the proposed pathways for modification of existing EPSAs and bringing forward new EPSAs, Sweden sees the need for amending the annexes of the draft recommendations to clarify the modification procedure and the identification process of EPSAs. Sweden highlights the importance to continue the work of addressing pressures and threats to marine biodiversity, including anthropogenic underwater noise and marine debris, and to include impacts of emerging threats such as deep sea mining to the future work of the Convention. Sweden stresses the importance of increasing the collaboration between CBD, regional sea conventions, and competent international organizations such as ISA, IMO, and regional fisheries management organizations. Sweden considers it important to intensify the collaboration with FAO and other fisheries management organizations in order to increase mainstreaming of biodiversity in fisheries and to develop voluntary guidelines for identifying and applying OECMs in fisheries. We support the continuation of capacity building and partnership activities and the global dialogue within the Sustainable Ocean Initiative to increase knowledge exchange and strengthen international collaboration. Finally, Sweden underscores the need to clarify the links between climate and biodiversity in the ocean, and to include this work strand in CBD's future work. In this context, Sweden suggests to include both conservation of ecosystems that are particularly vulnerable to climate change and ocean acidification, and restoration of coastal and carbon-rich marine ecosystems, including coral reefs, seagrass, mangroves, and kelps. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Sweden. I now give the floor to Israel, followed by France, followed by Spain, and then France. Israel, you have the floor.
Sure. Israel thanks the Secretariat for preparing document 6 on marine and coastal biodiversity. The conservation of marine and coastal biodiversity is very important to Israel, which is a coastal country. The plight of marine and coastal biodiversity is especially relevant in Israel today, as we are currently experiencing a large mystery oil spill, which began last week, all along Israel's Mediterranean coast. A massive cleanup operation is currently in progress with thousands of volunteers. This disaster certainly highlights the importance of taking into account the wide range of anthropogenic impacts on marine and coastal biodiversity in the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. At this time, we have some comments on part 1 on the progress report on the EBSAs. We wish to thank the participants in the expert workshop on the EBSAs that took place in Belgium in February 2020. Specifically, we welcome the work that has been accomplished to identify options for modifying the EBSA descriptions and for describing new EBSAs, which are given in detail in the annexes 1 to 14. Like other parties, Israel supports acceptance of these annexes, and Israel also believes that the annexes would benefit from editing and consolidation for better clarity. We have in Israel ecologically important areas in both the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea, and we are pleased to see the progress made with regards to improving how new EBSAs can be listed and how current EBSAs descriptions can be amended. Therefore, we support draft decision A and encourage the parties to support it also. We would like to stress that even though an EBSA may be submitted by a single party, we encourage all parties to the convention to act for the protection of all EBSAs wherever they are once that EBSA is listed. We have proposals for a number of amendments to the annexes in order to clarify and streamline them, as well as some other proposals for textual changes, which we shall submit in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Israel. I now give the floor to Spain, followed by France and the UK. Spain, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Given the key importance of marine biodiversity for achieving the CDB objectives, Spain believes that SBSTTA needs to include the following reference in its recommendation, namely the working group on the post-2020 framework when developing the new global biodiversity framework shall consider the protection, conservation, ecological restoration and sustainable use of marine and coastal biodiversity ecosystems, and will address various pressures such as plastics and microplastics pollution and other types of pollution, underwater noise caused by maritime traffic and offshore energies, invasive alien species, climate change, the impact of fishing on marine biodiversity due to bycatches and entanglement, amongst others, as well as seabed mining. The future global framework should also ensure that by 2030, 30% of the world's oceans are protected. We would also like these considerations to be included in the proposed COP decision in the title heading B, Other Matters, that we suggest should be renamed as Conservation of Marine and Coastal Biodiversity. Also, Spain considers that it would be appropriate to include a new paragraph in the preamble to the proposed COP decision that would refer to strengthening the CBD's collaboration and cooperation with other conventions, in particular with international and regional organisations and initiatives that have a mandate in areas beyond national jurisdiction in order to maintain ecological and migratory connectivity and effectively achieve the marine biodiversity conservation objectives. Finally, Spain suggests including a new operative paragraph 8 bis in the proposed COP decision that would encourage the parties and invite other governments to support the development of a global agreement to reduce plastic marine debris under the auspices of the UN Environmental Assembly. Thank you very much, Chair.
May, you are on mute.
Thank you. I now give the floor to France, followed by UK. You have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. France emphasizes that the current draft of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework does not sufficiently reflect the urgency of marine and coastal biodiversity protection. France calls for the new framework to be at least as representative of the challenges of protecting marine and coastal biodiversity as the preceding framework. The latter had two goals, Goal 6 on fisheries and Goal 10 on coral reefs. France also calls for the OEG 3 to take into account the importance of marine and coastal biodiversity during the development of the post-2020 framework. France recommends strengthening the following points. Fishery issues, and in particular, the bycatch. These should be integrated more fully. A goal of protecting 30% of land ecosystems and 30% of marine ecosystems should be incorporated. As was the ambition of the 57 countries of the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, as well, which is co-chaired by Costa Rica and France, as well as the goal of 10% high-level protection. A goal of protecting sites of great importance for biodiversity and particularly fragile ecosystems should be added, making it possible to address the protection of coral reefs in accordance notably with the International Coral Reef Initiative. The ocean climate nexus should be taken into greater account, mentioning the pillars of the Paris Accord: mitigation, adaptation, and redirection of financial flows, and supporting a goal of restoring and protecting ecosystems contributing to the mitigation or adaptation to climate change, such as the mangroves, seagrass, or coral reefs. The warnings of scientists should be incorporated more fully, in particular, those expressed in the special report of the IPCC on the ocean and the cryosphere, and the IPBES report. The linkages with other negotiation processes regarding the protection of the ocean should be strengthened, particularly those relating to the adoption of a global agreement on plastics under the UN Environmental Assembly, and the negotiations for a treaty on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, known as BBNJ. The issue of deep seabed mining as a potential cause of future pollution and degradation of marine ecosystems is fundamental. Finally, underwater noise should be explicitly mentioned as a factor in marine environmental pollution. Thank you.
Hello? Okay. Thank you, France. I now give the floor to UK, followed by Argentina and New Zealand.
Thank you,
UK,
Madam
you have
Chair.
the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United Kingdom would like to stress the role that the ocean plays in the overall health of the planet, delivering the oxygen we breathe, the food we eat, and sustaining billions of livelihoods across the globe. This is why the UK remains committed to ensuring that the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework properly reflects the importance of the ocean within its goals, targets, indicators, and monitoring framework, and why we support the need for at least 30% of the ocean to be protected within marine protected areas and OECMs, and the need for the whole ocean to be sustainably managed. We recognise the long discussions through many COPs and substers on the issue of ecologically and biologically sensitive areas. The information provided by the EBSA process will provide vital in the identification of marine protected areas established under the Agreement on the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Biodiversity in the BBNJ negotiations, which will be concluded this year. The workshop, hosted by the Government of Belgium, took us a long way to finalising this discussion. The UK still has a few concerns about the process, outlined in some of the annexes of the draft recommendation, and will make a submission on these to Substa. We are content on the role of the informal working group as described in the recommendation. The UK remains concerned that the conservation and sustainable use of the ocean remains underrepresented within the context of the draft GBF, and as such, welcomes the report of the thematic workshop on ocean and coastal biodiversity, which provides a sound basis for the strengthened consideration for ocean issues. We would specifically highlight and welcome the report on impacts of marine litter on marine and coastal biodiversity and habitats, and means to minimise and mitigate these impacts as an important contribution to the information on this issue. We agree, as the report makes clear, that large-scale systemic changes are needed globally to tackle the scale and complexity of plastic pollution in the ocean. This is why we encourage parties and invite other governments to join the UK in supporting the start of negotiations on a new global agreement on marine plastic litter and microplastics under the auspices of the UN Environment Assembly, which should be reflected in the decision. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, UK. I will now call to the floor Argentina, followed by New Zealand and Senegal.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This intervention is made on a preliminary and informal basis. On this agenda item, we wish to make 3 comments. Firstly, on the identification of options to modify EBSA descriptions and to describe new areas. Argentina shares the agreement reached in the expert workshop about the need to adopt a new procedure, since the current procedure does not respond to all the situations that come up. Turning to the draft recommendation under consideration, Argentina thinks it's necessary to include a preambular paragraph on sovereignty disputes. This should clearly indicate that activities and actions that are carried out under the procedure to describe EBSAs should be interpreted without prejudice to a state party on a maritime or territorial dispute or a dispute related to demarcation of marine areas. Additionally, Argentina considers that the draft recommendation should make reference to UNCLOS. It should recall that UNCLOS is the international instrument that regulates the protection of the marine environment, whereas the CBD, in this case, is dedicated to making a scientific contribution through the description of EBSAs. Secondly now, Argentina takes note of the report from the thematic workshop on marine and coastal biodiversity, as well as the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We wish to point out that this report collects the various points of view presented by experts that were invited to participate in this event, and this report should not be considered as a negotiated result and should be taken into account as a valuable contribution together with other inputs and agreements reached by parties when negotiating the global framework. Thirdly, turning to point G of the document, namely addressing biodiversity concerns in fisheries, Argentina wishes to highlight that we are applying measures that fit within the definition of OECMs adopted in Decision 14/8. Including the implementation of no fishing zones, opening and closure of areas, and thus contributing to the conservation and sustainable use of fishing resources in the Southern Atlantic. Argentina hopes to continue to contribute to the discussion of this agenda item on future occasions. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Argentina. I will now give the floor to New Zealand, followed by Senegal and Belgium. New Zealand, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. New Zealand acknowledges the importance of strongly integrating the conservation and sustainable use of marine and coastal biodiversity into the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. And to that end, we welcome the work of the Executive Secretary on the compilation and synthesis of information on the various important marine and coastal issues in paragraph 7 of this recommendation. New Zealand continues to be supportive of the EPSA work programme, including efforts to achieve greater clarity on criteria and modalities that can assist states and competent international authorities to describe EPSA, and on efforts to strengthen the scientific credibility and transparency of these processes. New Zealand appreciates the work undertaken since COP14 by the expert workshop and for the reformulated annexes that we have before us. On the matter of extending the term of the Informal Advisory Group on EPSA, and as we understand it, amending the group's terms of reference to expand their tasks and responsibilities in line with paragraph 3, we have no objections to this at this point. We do have a suggested amendment to paragraph 8 of the recommendation, where the Executive Secretary is requested to facilitate the compilation, synthesis and sharing of information on efforts to implement the post-2020 framework with respect to various thematic issues related to marine and coastal biodiversity. While we are supportive of this action, and we know that this has been useful at points throughout the previous framework, New Zealand's view is that this requires a qualifier to ensure that this is compiled and shared on the basis of priorities as agreed and requested by the parties. Therefore, we suggest the addition of the text as and when guided by parties. In this way, parties can guide the Executive Secretary iteratively and as needed to conduct this work. We have noted the comments made by other parties so far on the annexes themselves. While we have no major issues to raise in this session on those annexes as they are drafted, we certainly acknowledge that these need to be fit for purpose in order to be useful, and we will be ready to consider them further as SBSTTA 24 continues. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. I now call to the floor Senegal, followed by Belgium and Chile. Senegal. Senegal, are you on?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Merci, Madame.
I think we've lost Senegal. So in the interest of time, okay, is he back?
L'atelier de novembre 2019 et plus particulièrement l'objectif 2.
I would like to speak to goal 2 in particular. Senegal would like to emphasize that this target of protecting 30% of the oceans by 2030. At this stage, the efforts taken have not been sufficient to preserve the ecosystems and to realize the benefits of a socioeconomic nature. The studies have shown, at least 50% have shown, that half of the seas need to be protected and that fisheries also require sustainability as a requirement. It is important to effectively, I'm sorry, the quality is insufficient for interpretation.
Yes, Senegal, it seems that your connection is a little bit too slow to allow for interpretation. Are you able to maybe do it without the video? Maybe that will help with the connection. Continue to speak. Okay, I've lost you altogether now, Senegal. So we will come back to you if you're able to come back on. If not today, at least tomorrow, but we'll see how we go. I will now give the floor to Belgium. Belgium, you have the floor, and then we'll see about Senegal.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for giving me the floor. I'm here with future generations to show why we are doing this. So apologies for interruptions. As part of the strong group of states known as the Blue Leaders, we work tirelessly to keep the ocean at the forefront of the international agenda in these unprecedented times. Blue Leaders support the protection of 30% of the ocean through a network of highly and fully protected areas, and the finalization of the negotiations on a new treaty on biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. In that capacity, we also aim at strengthening CBD's marine work. Regarding SBSTTA document 24/6, Belgium would like to underline its continued commitment to the EPSA process. This commitment was the reason Belgium collaborated with the Secretariat as well as the government of Germany to organize a workshop on EPSAs in February 2020 when we could still meet in a live manner, which were the inspiration for the annexes to this draft recommendation. We are of the opinion that COP15 should agree on a procedure like described in the annexes. This is necessary to keep the EPSA process scientifically sound, up to date, relevant, and legitimate. We are generally content with the procedure described in the annexes, and we will send some amendments that are aimed at providing some clarifications. There are two things we would like to stress regarding the proposed annexes. Firstly, we think that the distinction between the EPSA repository and the information sharing mechanism incorporated in the current annexes is actually the key to solving issues we did not manage to move forward on at the previous COP. We were faced with a situation, or we are faced in a situation, where equally valid claims are made. The valid claim that national sovereignty gives any state the right to describe EPSAs in their own jurisdiction as they please, and the valid claim that any internationally adopted decision can only be changed by another internationally adopted decision. And in order to overcome that dichotomy, the procedure described in the annexes cleverly proposes two different paths. Either through either through SBSTTA and COP into the repository, or directly from So I really apologize for this. Regarde, on va regarder ici. So either through Substa and COP into the repository, or directly from the state into the information sharing mechanism. And the choice is actually up to the sovereign state. But going through the Substa COP is a fair entry ticket for the repository. So for us, this is the most practical way to reconcile different equally valid objectives and claims, and we support this way forward. Secondly, we would like to underline the importance of scientifically sound peer review process for any proposed modifications or new EPSAs. I really apologize for this. Can I? No, actually, I have 3 other priorities, but I think I will put myself back on the list and tell them at that point. Sorry.
Okay, so I think in the interest of time also, we'll have to move on. I think we will only have time for another couple of statements for today. So I will now give the floor to Chile, followed by Denmark, and then the Russian Federation. So Chile, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the options to modify the description of EPSAs, to describe new areas and to strengthen scientific credibility and the transparency of the process, Chile believes that the processes to propose, assess and designate the EPSAs should be less dynamic in terms of modifications. We believe that we do not have sufficient time to test out and apply the modifications when they have just been changed, which is why we suggest that we need to extend the deadlines for their use. Turning now to the description of new areas, in particular those that straddle more than one jurisdiction, it's important to bear in mind the different regulatory instruments and procedures that are available to the parties. In particular, if the EPSAs are not contained in national guidelines or national legislation. We think that it's necessary to continue to encourage parties to make the necessary changes to nationally integrate EPSAs and therefore be able to really use them. Turning now to the item Other Matters. We believe that it addresses important topics. Thus, we think that it would be useful to use a different name for this subheading to highlight its relevance, or else separate out into 2 recommendations, because for the moment we feel that it doesn't make visible the importance of the conservation of these biodiversity elements. Chile also takes note of the compilation work that's been carried out by the Secretariat, but we believe that this has not been beefed up enough. It needs to be strengthened and made more visible in terms of its relevance. Chile believes that we need to encourage parties to take action and generate strategies to avoid, minimize and mitigate the impacts of underwater anthropogenic noise, marine litter and mining on biodiversity, amongst others, maintaining our focus on the development of strategies that facilitate the development of community awareness raising. In the same way, we believe that it would be relevant for us to urge the parties to make progress on marine spatial planning to render compatible the different uses that may coexist in marine and coastal zones. Given this point, and together with the protection of at least 30% of the ocean and the land by 2030, these are points that we believe are essential to include in the post-2020 framework. Finally, we suggest that we should link the aspects addressed in this topic on the agenda with other international ocean processes, in particular the negotiations that are underway for the next agreement on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction and the Code on Mining in International Waters under the International Seabed Authority. Madam Chair, these are our general preliminary comments on this subject, and at the correct moment in time we'll hand in all the details, suggestions and relevant proposals. Thank you very much.
Chile. I now give the floor to Denmark, followed by the Russian Federation. Denmark, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Denmark supports the interventions by Portugal and the EU. 2 points Denmark would like to bring forward in particular. First, Denmark is committed to reaching an ambitious agreement on global marine biodiversity and support the principle of the identifying options for updating and improving descriptions of EBSAs and for describing new areas. Denmark acknowledges the work of the Secretariat developing the document on marine and coastal biodiversity. However, we find marine and coastal biodiversity issues of great importance and support that the draft recommendations are separated into two draft recommendations, one on conservation of marine and coastal biodiversity and the other on EBSAs. Second point, on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. In that regard, we stress the need for the conservation of marine biodiversity to be better reflected within the post-2020 GBF, including combating marine plastic litter to complement the ongoing work in UNEA in support of a global agreement on marine litter and the Ocean Climate Nexus in support of the UNFFC's dialogue on ocean and climate. Denmark underlines the importance of including marine-related indicators to the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and wishes to highlight the UNEP Regional Seas Working Paper on regional seas biodiversity under the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework from this February. We believe this report is a valuable document for the co-chairs and the CBD Secretariat to take into account when revising the CBD document on indicators. We support Target 2 to protect 30% of the ocean and land by 2030 and commend the support of the target by the Global Ocean Alliance, High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, and Blue Leaders. In that regard, we would like to underline the importance of CBD Decision 14/8 on protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures. Finally, we're looking forward to the guidance of the CBD Secretariat and the co-chairs of the open-ended working group on how we can move forward to make sure marine and coastal biodiversity issues are reflected adequately in the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Denmark. And the last intervention for today will come from the Russian Federation. Russia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Russia would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing the documents on this item. Above all, we would like to underscore the interdependence between this item and certain of the Aichi biodiversity targets and the corresponding biodiversity objectives. When drawing up Aichi Target 11 of Strategic Goal C, at least 10% of coastal and marine areas were to be conserved through existing systems of protected areas. In attempting to accelerate the achievement of the Aichi targets, and at the same time recognizing that the indicator for Target 11 has not been achieved, an even more ambitious target is being set to achieve 50% spatial planning coverage of marine areas by 2030 and conservation of at least 30% through an effective and well-connected system of protected areas. These indicators are hardly smart, considering that they are quite unrealistic. Thus, it is worthwhile agreeing beforehand on a general definition of marine protected areas, which should be clearer, in our opinion. Robust criteria for delineating marine protected areas must be established. And this becomes even more important when proposals on procedures for amending descriptions of ecologically and biologically significant marine areas and marine spatial planning are addressed. In Russia, the total area of marine waters that are part of the Russian protected areas is more than 21.2 million hectares, which is 3% of Russia's territorial waters and exclusive economic zone. The marine waters are part of 30 federal protected areas with a total area of federal waters of 20.4 million hectares. We do not think that 30% is a realistic target. We believe that special studies are required to show in an evidence-based fashion what percentage and degree of preservation of major territories untouched by human activity should be applied to each region of the world. Furthermore, we support the attention being given to the issues of marine environmental pollution, marine debris, including microplastics. In this respect, we consider it essential to take into account the expertise of such organizations as FAO and the Marine Environment Protection Committee of the International Maritime Organization, which under the aegis of the group of experts, GESAMP, have established the working group on sea-based sources of marine litter, including fishing gear and other litter related to shipping. The second interim report of the working group on these issues of sea-based sources of marine litter, which FAO published in June 2020, is of clear interest. In our opinion, it is of particular importance to focus on noise pollution as well as pollution of the Arctic marine environment by microplastics. Also, the lack of methodologies for dealing with seabed deposits of microplastics. Therefore, Russia also supports working on underwater noise and protecting the environment, considering the particular vulnerability of Arctic ecosystems, the difficulty of cleanup, and the lengthy recovery period. We support the statements of the other countries on the issue of protection of these areas, EPSAs, as being a separate issue to be covered. Thank you.
And I think with this, we will have to draw today's session to a close. I am looking at the list now of parties that have already raised their hands, and we will take all of these tomorrow. So we will have tomorrow Belgium, who will get a chance to complete the intervention that they started earlier, and then we'll give Senegal also another chance, given that they tried earlier, and then we will have Italy, Philippines, India, Thailand, China. So that's the list that we have for today, and tomorrow that's the list that we'll start with. Dear colleagues, I would like to thank you for your attention and for your interventions today. Thank you to the Secretariat. We will see you all tomorrow. Have a good evening, have a good day, and I close this session. Thank you.